Oui.
Ah
Oui.
C'est bon. Ça c'est très italien. J'avais oublié. Ça c'est ma femme. Non, alors je parce que s'il y a ça, je dois... There is a PowerPoint.
C'est bon.
Voilà, allora c'est vraiment ça. Allez, c'est ça. Voilà. I think you are quite familiar with the question of Western Sahara, at least most of you. So I keep the history of the case very short, and I limit the history of the case to the United Nations. Of course, the United Nations is central to the whole question of Western Sahara. Its past history, and ultimately because a solution, whatever the outcome will be of this pending matter, will be sanctioned and finalized in a UN context, particularly in the Security Council of the United Nations. Good or bad that might be, but the UN is at the center of this matter. So something has been mentioned already about past history. I just highlight the fact that recognizing Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory entitled under international law to self-determination is something that dates back to the 1960s. The big wave of decolonization in Africa and elsewhere in the world. Western Sahara was a Spanish colony, was recognized as being this basic right to self-determination. As we approached the time for Spain to leave, at the time of Francisco Franco, Morocco, in fact, originated a request from the International Court of Justice because there was this claim of Moroccan sovereignty over the territory linked to past history and so on. But the finding, in the opinion of the court, was to the contrary, that there was not enough ground on Moroccan claim of sovereignty, and therefore the people of Western Sahara had a basic fundamental right to self-determination. The court confirmed past history, and I mention this because this opinion has become the mother of all opinion resolutions and tribunal and court decisions over the decades. If you look from the European Court of Justice, many national tribunals and so on have always referred to this basic concept. These are people entitled under the international law, under the UN Charter, to self-determination. Spain withdrew, failing to organize a referendum, which was being their responsibility. Morocco invaded, and so on. You're familiar with this 16-year war. 1991 agreement on a ceasefire between Polisario and Morocco. Of course, the year has a meaning because we are immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The end of the Cold War and so on. There was a certain wind of change around the world, which reached also the impasse in Western Sahara. The mission was agreed upon and approved and launched by the Security Council with two tasks. One, monitoring the ceasefire between the parties. Secondly, organizing a referendum, hence the R in MINUS, referendum. One thing that should be kept in mind is that the mission was supposed to organize a referendum within 9 months of its launch. That's the context. Next. Okay. What happened is simply that Morocco had invaded and still controlled most of the territory and has been always refusing any sort of effort to arrange for a referendum. I don't go into the history of it, it's very complicated, but the bottom line is Morocco does not allow or permit the international community to fulfill its obligation towards the people of Western Sahara. Now, the reasons are also fairly simple. Fundamentally, in the United Nations, which, as I say, is a bit at the center of this whole question, there are very few countries that are interested in the question of Western Sahara. Very few. These countries also happen to be very powerful countries in the organization, and also they happen to be all, for different reasons, interested in protecting Morocco's interest in Western Sahara and the continued illegal occupation of this land. Who are these countries? Which are these countries? I always mention and some of you are familiar with this, but you will hear it again, is a group of friends of the Secretary General on Western Sahara. Is a self-convened group of 5 members of the United Nations. 4 permanent members of the Security Council: France, United Kingdom, United States, and Russia, and a 5th member, which is Spain. This group of friends of the Secretary General, not necessarily Western Sahara, meet in advance of whatever deliberation has to take place before the Security Council convenes to discuss the question of the Sahara, or before the General Assembly or any other UN body addresses the question, and they decide a bit among themselves what should be coming or not coming out of the formal session. They draft resolutions, they draft decisions, they prepare, they cook the soup before it is served in the formal proceedings. Now, about this group, I just, maybe there's not much time to get into that, but just very briefly, what is striking about this group is, first, of course, there's not a single African country in the group, although, as you all know, Western Sahara happens to be in Africa. Secondly, there is no country that recently lived through an experience of decolonization. Of course, the US, but nothing in the style of the origin of the decolonization issue, which is the issue that we are dealing with here. And more importantly, or negatively, for the cause of these oppressed people, they're all, as I said, keen to protect Morocco's interests. There is a sparring. They vary between France or the United States or Spain, but no matter what, they all convene on the same intention to protect Moroccan interests. That's one half of the problem in the UN. And by the way, there are similar considerations about the situation in the European Union. They say, we jump over Baker because there is no time. The second half of the problem is that the other member states, as you know, there are almost 200 member states in the UN, are not, either they are not interested or consider the issue to be important enough, or they're colluded with the powerful friends of Morocco. They don't want to antagonize Spain, or most of all US or France, or they have themselves certain interest to support Morocco's presence in Western Sahara. So the mix of these two things, a few powerful members who protect Morocco and the indifference or collusion of others, leads to this situation of the impasse that prevails since the launch of the mission. Rays of hope, I leave it to our friend from the American Association of Jurists, and the UN Executive Branch, I skip it. It's just to say that even the UN Secretary, because I'm an international civil servant, there is also grave responsibility for the UN in action with the successive Secretaries General as head of the executive branch of the organization, that in my view could have been doing much more to prompt member states towards a more responsible behavior in Western Sahara. Next. So the situation to this day, in a simplified manner, continues to be that on one hand, Frente Polisario, the Sahrawi government in exile, claims that there is no possibility of any referendum for the self-determination that could exclude a priori the possibility that people decide for independence. Morocco's position is that they are ready to grant a degree of autonomy to Western Sahara, but absolutely they cannot negotiate in any way the notion of sovereignty of Morocco over the territory. So this is where the situation is, has been for a long time. But recently there have been some important developments, and I listed some of them. One is that some time ago, fairly recently, the Polisario denounced a ceasefire following certain activities that I have no time to go into on the part of Morocco in the militarized zone and opening up a passage anyway. There were a number of things happened whereby Polisario decided to denounce a ceasefire and say we don't honor it, and going back to a situation of conflict. The second event is that after a long vacancy, finally the Secretary General managed to designate a new personal envoy on Western Sahara. The personal envoy is the person who should try to sort out the political impasse. These are the negotiators on behalf of the Secretary General with various parties trying to move the issue forward. This fellow is an Italian and Swedish, half Italian and Swedish former international civil servant, Staffan de Mistura. Third recent development is the adoption of a Security Council resolution last October extending the mandate of MINURSO. MINURSO is extended 1 year after the other. It used to be 2, I don't remember. But anyway, each year they extend the. What is interesting in this resolution, there are several aspects, but I would just mention 2. One is that this resolution extending MINURSO ignores completely the substance of the issue and what's happening on the ground, in fact, because if you consider that the 2 tasks were to monitor the ceasefire, and the ceasefire is no longer there, and to organize a referendum, and the referendum is not in the cards at the moment, MINURSO is an empty box. It's the idea of extending the mandate, when the mandate is not something that you can in any form or shape can implement, is a bit of a nonsense. It's a deliberate way of not looking at the issue. For instance, the Security Council did not consider why the ceasefire was broken. It expressed concern about the resumption of hostilities, but why? What's happening? What kind of way forward is there for MINURSO, or for that matter for the poor personal envoy, which will have to handle a very difficult context, also related to relations between Morocco and Algeria, which are very difficult and so on, without any strong indication. The Council likes, for instance, the idea of round tables, to have round tables with Algeria, Morocco, and people around. I mean, these things are passé 100%, but the Council really didn't have the nerve to really grasp, once again, the question. The second point is the language. The language of this resolution has been evolving over the years. All the resolutions of the Security Council were citing international law, the conventions on the self-determination of colonial countries and people, the Charter of the UN, all what is bedrock entitlement of people of Western Sahara, the referendum, the self-determination. Now the language has moved a bit out of the question of international legality of the UN Charter into a sort of political thing. We have to find a political way forward. We have to be, the 2 parties should be pragmatistic, should be realistic, should find a way in common. Now this is very misleading. It's deliberate, it's the kind of language that Washington and Paris have been injecting in these resolutions, aiming at putting the 2 sides sort of on equal footing. They don't agree on this, they should work out something among themselves. This is a distortion. It's a distortion of a reality of a people oppressed, whose fundamental rights have been denied, and that are just claiming what is owed to them under the UN Charter and international law. And on the other hand, a party that has been responsible for all this and oppressing them day in and day out. And the idea of equalizing the 2 sides is a deliberate misrepresentation of the issue. Anyway, the rest, there's no time. The last there's another one. Okay, now this, but you tell me when I'm over, because this is a bit long.
Yeah.
Allora, because I'm very over 15 minutes with exactly that. So what to do about this? The first thing is obvious. It's imperative to get more member states of the United Nations. It's the same thing, by the way, applies to the European Union in a way, to engage, to take an interest in this, to create an alternative view, an alternative environment to the monopoly of the friends of the Secretary General. And again, Mr. Fattorini will be the master of these topics, because there are initiatives underway in Geneva and elsewhere where member states that were not that keenly involved are kind of presenting some alternative line of action that can be on human rights, but also politically. So there is some movement. And there is, related to this, what also is interesting is that within countries, even countries like Spain or France or the United States, there is increasingly new actors that try to encourage a more responsible behavior. One, of course, is the judiciary. As I mentioned earlier, most tribunals, most courts of justice internationally within countries are increasingly advocating a more, responsible implementation of what international law envisages. And this applies also to Parliament. Maybe it's because parliamentarians tend by profession to be dealing with legal matters, norms and principles and so on. But you see it, for instance, when Donald Trump recognized Moroccan sovereignty, quote unquote, on the territory, there were a number of American parliamentarians from both sides of the aisle that really expressed their strong disagreement. In France, even in Spain, there are parliamentarians that are much more balanced in their evaluation of the situation. And these are forces that should apply pressures on governments to be more responsible in international fora and the UN. What arguments to be used to mobilize? First of all, obviously, implement international law. Do what is, give the Sahrawis what is owed to them by the international community. This is very important, even beyond, if you wish, the case of Western Sahara. The whole structure of international relations is based on a set of standards and norms that have been commonly agreed and adopted by the Committee of Nations. Every time that these things are ignored or violated, it's not just a problem in this or that environment, on this or that issue, but it's the weakening of a system on which an effort towards international peace and security must sustain itself. To be more practical, what the hell does it mean that you are tremendously upset for Russia invading Crimea, for instance, when you have nothing to say about the situation in Western Sahara? Just to give an example close to us. If you go the way of realpolitik, of l'économie, you weaken a system. And that system is what we have to try to strive for a degree of stability and consistency in international relations. So you owe it to the Sahrawi, you owe it to the UN, and that's why I'm here, because I believe a lot in the organization, and so these things have to be said. Then there are other aspects. Conflict prevention. I think, for instance, the Swiss participation in the Security Council. Conflict prevention is a big theme. It's much cheaper in terms of human cost, in terms of economy and so on, to prevent conflict. You have books, you have seminars every day over this topic. Well, Western Sahara is a typical case of conflict prevention. Typical. And what's happening between Morocco and Algeria shows how, if you disregard conflict prevention, you might move to a situation of it. So, if anybody who cares for this so much praised question of conflict prevention, you should get interested and be active around the question of Western Sahara. Not to mention, of course, the regional, of course, the Maghreb region. There's a Maghreb Union that is completely paralyzed by this agreement over Western Sahara. The stability in the region is a pretense. I mean, there is a perception that it is a stable region. It is not. And stability is affected a lot by the unresolved question. And then this, I do it or not? Just move on.
Yeah, no, it's very important.
I do this. The other aspect, and last, although there are others, but is this, the Sahrawis themselves and many of their supporters, be it countries, ONGs, lawyers, whatever, are a bit fixated with the Security Council. Indeed, the Security Council is crucial because the political way forward that will come out and will have to be sanctioned by the Council. However, the Council is the least friendly UN body to the Sahrawi cause for a number of reasons. And not all the issues related to Western Sahara have to be fought in the Council, for example, human rights. There are lots of other United Nations fora. There's the General Assembly, the Committee, the Decolonization Committee, the UN specialized agencies. I will say, so I say it once more, is that the UN is like a piano. You have to play all the keys of the piano of the United Nations. So there is a bit of a fixation with the Council, and I think it would be important for the Sahrawis and the governments that sustain this cause to be more active in other environments, dove in the UN, where you don't have a veto power, where decision can be made on a majority vote, and where you can raise issues such as human rights that do not prejudge the political solution, but can, meantime, or national resources can be pushed forward. And there is a whole chapter of the UN Charter, Chapter 11, where there is a whole list of obligations of the international community towards non-self-governing people and territories, and all these obligations are not being fulfilled with Western Sahara. And pending a solution, they should be fulfilled. And these things can be pushed forth in many UN bodies, and I think a greater effort should be done in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned many very interesting points, and I think there will be. No, I have one question. Yeah. And there will be a lot of discussion and points that we can mention, and we can go in depth. Just one question before I give you the word. What do you think if MINURSO would stop to exist? And this is also a request by many Sahrawis. So what do you think? What would happen on the ground?
I think it would be a big mistake. I understand the frustration of the Sahrawis towards MINURSO, all the more so that, as I say, there is no mandate that can be implemented. And yet, MINURSO continues to be a testimonial to the fact that it's an issue that has not been resolved. It is a testimonial, however passive, of the fact that the UN is engaged in something. You know, if you do away with MINURSO, I mean, you don't even have a symbolic, let's say, token expression or presence or recognition implicitly that something remains to be done. Again, the referendum is only in our letter in the MINURSO, but it's still there. I don't know, it's very little. But doing away with the mission would not in any way or form mean any way forward. To the contrary, one could also say, although it might not be the case, that there could be even more abuses or even a free hand. And also the symbolic connotation of doing away with the mission would be, in my view, very negative in terms of the interest of the people of Western Sahara.
D'abord, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs de cette soirée. Et compte tenu du temps de parole qui m'a été imparti et du sujet qui nous préoccupe ce soir, à savoir la contribution de la Suisse à la résolution de ce conflit, j'aborderai 3 questions qui sont quelque peu techniques, mais qui s'imposent lorsqu'on se pose la question de savoir ce qu'un État peut faire pour contribuer à la résolution de cette question. Donc le premier sujet concerne les violations graves et systématiques des droits humains du peuple sahraoui par le Royaume du Maroc. Je rappelle ici, et je peut-être répète quelque peu ce que Francesco a déjà dit, l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies avait demandé à la puissance administrante du territoire, l'Espagne, déjà en 1966, d'établir dans les plus brefs délais les modalités d'organisation d'un référendum d'autodétermination du peuple sahraoui, conformément à la résolution 1514 de l'Assemblée générale qui contient la déclaration, la déclaration sur l'octroi de l'indépendance aux pays et peuples coloniaux. L'Espagne a quitté le territoire 10 ans après, en février 1976, sans remplir son mandat, tandis que le Royaume du Maroc avait déjà commencé à envahir le Sahara occidental, déclenchant le conflit avec le Front Polisario. Quand on parle de violation systématique des droits d'un peuple, on se réfère à une situation, ici celle d'une occupation militaire illégale, qui génère des violations directement liées au système de répression implicite à l'occupation. Ainsi, 46 ans d'occupation et d'annexion illégale du Sahara occidental ont causé d'innombrables violations des droits humains du peuple sahraoui. Pas seulement de ceux qui sont restés dans les territoires occupés, mais également de ceux qui vivent dans les territoires administrés par le Front Polisario, à l'est du mur de séparation, et de ceux qui vivent depuis des décennies avec leur progéniture dans les camps de réfugiés, dans le désert algérien, et enfin ceux qui ont choisi l'exil. Sans entrer ici dans les détails, il faut considérer que tous les droits civils et politiques, y compris le droit à l'autodétermination, et tous les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, y compris le droit au développement et à la souveraineté permanente sur les ressources naturelles, sont systématiquement violés à cause de l'occupation du Sahara occidental par le Royaume du Maroc. La question d'un éventuel génocide culturel peut être posée en relation avec l'occupation prolongée du Sahara occidental, la construction du mur de sable et l'impossibilité objective pour le peuple sahraoui de déterminer librement son développement économique, social et culturel. Depuis la création de la mission des Nations Unies pour le référendum au Sahara occidental, le Royaume du Maroc a continué de tout mettre en œuvre pour empêcher l'organisation du référendum. Ceci n'a été possible, comme l'a bien expliqué Francesco, qu'avec le soutien militaire, financier et politique de plusieurs puissances. Au fil du temps, le Royaume du Maroc a développé plusieurs instruments de ce qu'on appelle communément le soft power. Parmi ceux-ci, l'organisation fréquente au Maroc de conférences régionales et internationales en matière de droits humains, qui a culminé avec l'organisation du Forum mondial des droits humains à Marrakech en 2014. Ça a été le point culminant et le début du déclin de cette stratégie. Car depuis la dernière mission technique du Haut Commissariat aux droits de l'homme au Maroc et au Sahara occidental en 2015, l'année suivante, le Royaume a hermétiquement fermé les portes à tout accès aux territoires non autonomes occupés de la part des observateurs indépendants. D'autre part, depuis qu'il a fait capoter le plan Baker au début des années 2000, le Royaume du Maroc s'est montré de plus en plus actif dans les salons feutrés du Conseil des droits de l'homme, de l'ONU, en s'associant aux pays responsables de plusieurs initiatives. Parmi ceux-ci, la Suisse. La Suisse a donc accepté que le Royaume du Maroc s'associe au lancement de l'initiative pour la protection des journalistes, alors qu'il est notoire que les journalistes marocains et sahraouis sont constamment persécutés s'ils expriment une quelconque critique envers les agissements ou la politique du roi. Ensuite, la Suisse a accepté que le Royaume du Maroc s'associe aux initiatives sur les droits de l'homme et l'environnement, les droits de l'homme et la justice transitionnelle, la responsabilité de protéger. Tout cela semble irrationnel, voire cynique. L'argument porté avec plus ou moins de conviction par la diplomatie helvétique est celui de l'engagement constructif. Ce n'est qu'en développant un dialogue constant avec le pays qu'on peut inspirer des améliorations. À notre avis, cette approche n'a donné aucun fruit. Au contraire, permettre à une puissance occupante de se présenter comme promotrice des droits humains ne fait que la conforter dans sa position et lui assurer une impunité pour les crimes commis contre le peuple sous occupation. Il est temps que la Suisse change radicalement d'approche, afin de ne pas apparaître comme complice des crimes commis au Sahara occidental et qu'elle appuie plutôt l'idée de la création d'un mandat de rapporteur spécial du Conseil des droits de l'homme sur la situation dans nos territoires non autonomes du Sahara occidental sous occupation. Le deuxième sujet concerne spécifiquement la question fondamentale de la violation du droit des peuples à l'autodétermination, qui est au fait à l'origine de toutes les autres violations graves et systématiques. À l'occasion de la dernière présentation du rapport de la part du Royaume du Maroc, respectivement en 2015 et 2016, tant le Comité des droits économiques, sociaux et culturels comme le Comité des droits de l'homme des Nations Unies ont exprimé leurs préoccupations quant à la période d'attente prolongée pour que le peuple sahraoui puisse exercer librement son droit à l'autodétermination conformément au premier article commun aux deux pactes internationaux. À cet égard, le Comité des droits de l'homme, qui surveille l'application du pacte international relatif aux droits civils et politiques, dans son observation générale numéro 12 sur l'article 1, se référant au deuxième paragraphe de cet article, considère que le droit des peuples de disposer librement de leurs richesses et ressources naturelles entraîne des devoirs correspondants pour tous les États et la communauté internationale dans son ensemble. Le paragraphe 3 de l'avis du comité est particulièrement important, car il impose aux États parties des obligations spécifiques à l'égard de tous les peuples qui n'ont pas pu en exercer ou ont été privés de la possibilité d'exercer leur droit à l'autodétermination. Le comité indique que tous les États parties au pacte devraient prendre des mesures positives pour faciliter la réalisation et le respect du droit des peuples à disposer d'eux-mêmes. Enfin, j'attire votre attention sur le paragraphe 6 du dispositif de la résolution adoptée chaque année par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, intitulée « Activités économiques et autres préjudiciables aux intérêts des peuples du territoire non autonome ». Dans ce paragraphe, l'Assemblée générale demande à tous les gouvernements de prendre des mesures législatives, administratives ou autres à l'encontre de leurs ressortissants et des personnes morales relevant de leur juridiction qui possèdent et exploitent dans le territoire non autonome des entreprises préjudiciables aux intérêts des peuples de ces territoires, afin de mettre fin à ces entreprises. Maintenant, sachant que toute activité économique développée dans le territoire non autonome du Sahara occidental requiert le consentement libre, préalable et informé du peuple et de son représentant, on peut se poser la question de savoir quelles mesures positives la Suisse a-t-elle prises ou entend-elle prendre pour faciliter la réalisation et le respect du droit du peuple sahraoui à l'autodétermination. Par ailleurs, quelles mesures législatives, administratives ou autres la Suisse a-t-elle prises ou entend-elle prendre pour mettre fin aux activités des entreprises basées en Suisse qui développent des activités économiques au Sahara occidental sans le consentement libre, préalable et éclairé du représentant du peuple sahraoui reconnu par les Nations Unies, c'est-à-dire le Front Polisario. Le troisième et dernier sujet concerne les violations graves et systématiques du droit international humanitaire de la part du Royaume du Maroc. Je fais référence en particulier aux violations de la 4e Convention de Genève, celle relative à la protection des civils en temps de guerre, pour laquelle d'ailleurs le Front Polisario a déposé en 2015 auprès de la Confédération suisse une déclaration unilatérale dans laquelle il s'engage à en respecter les dispositions. En particulier, ils ont été systématiquement violés tout au long des 46 années d'occupation et le sont encore aujourd'hui. Les articles 31 et 32 qui interdisent la coercition physique ou morale, le meurtre, la torture, les châtiments corporels et toute autre brutalité. L'article 33 qui interdit les punitions collectives et des mesures d'intimidation, pillage et représailles. L'article 49 qui interdit la déportation hors du territoire occupé et dans le territoire de la puissance occupante, ainsi que l'interdiction de transférer une partie de sa propre population civile dans le territoire occupé. L'article 53 sur l'interdiction de la destruction de biens meubles ou immeubles appartenant individuellement ou collectivement à des personnes privées, et l'article 76 réglant le traitement des prisonniers qui doivent être jugés et détenus dans le territoire occupé. Ceci dit, il faut logiquement conclure que le Royaume du Maroc viole également l'article 1er de la Convention, qui stipule, je cite, que les hautes parties contractantes s'engagent à respecter et à faire respecter la présente Convention en toutes circonstances. L'article 1er, commun en cas de convention, est investi d'une force impérative et compte parmi les moyens disponibles pour assurer le respect des conventions. En s'engageant à respecter et faire respecter les conventions, tous les États ont également reconnu l'importance de prendre toutes les mesures raisonnables pour empêcher les violations de se produire. Cette obligation a été expressément reconnue par la conférence de Téhéran sur les droits de l'homme en 1968, puis rappelée par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. L'obligation de veiller au respect de la législation par les autres parties contractantes a été explicitement approuvée par la Cour internationale de justice en 1986, 2004 et 2005, et enfin par le Conseil de sécurité des Nations unies. Alors, la qualité d'État dépositaire ne confère pas à la Suisse d'obligations juridiques supplémentaires concernant le respect des conventions par rapport aux autres hautes parties contractantes. Toutefois, il est légitime de se poser la question de savoir de quelle manière la Suisse remplit-elle ses obligations internationales et plus précisément, quel est l'engagement de la Suisse en tant que haute partie contractante à faire appliquer la 4e Convention de Genève dans le conflit du Sahara occidental afin de protéger le peuple sahraoui sous occupation. Ces différentes questions pourraient faire l'objet d'interpellations au Conseil fédéral. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je reste à votre disposition.